Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's free cybersecurity webinar, Major Cybersecurity Threats, Trends, Preparation, and Response, brought to you by Pluralsight. These days, cybersecurity failures flood the news, casting feelings that run the spectrum from fear to fascination. But these stories do little to help executives and board members create plans to prepare their team. So today, with the help of our very special international guest, we will be learning on how to identify the major security threats in today's business world, how to prepare for the worst, and respond to a cybersecurity threat. Hello to each and every one of you. My name is Shobit Khanna, and I'll be your moderator today. Now, we still have a few people joining us in the back rows, so while they do so, let me quickly take you through some housekeeping. Now, please note that all attendees are muted and are in listen-only mode today. However, we do encourage you to interact with us today. You can do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. We will do our best to get to all of your burning questions towards the end of the webinar. Also, we love getting feedback from you, so I would like to bring your attention to an exit survey, which you will receive in the follow-up email, along with the recording of this webinar. We would love to know what you thought about today's session, as well as get ideas and your recommendations for future sessions with us as well. And of course, if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can do so on Twitter and use the hashtag #PSCybersec. Now that the housekeeping's out of the way and we're all settled in, let me introduce you to our special guest for the evening, Dr. Lyron Andrews. Dr. Andrews' technology career spans 3 decades. He has worked with the New York City Department of Education, BMG Direct, and as BNY Mellon Dean of Technology. He is also the founder of Profabula. Lyron has also taught cybersecurity and teaches cybersecurity to help organizations become safer in this day and age. He has traveled to over 28 countries, delivering the ISC2 training to some of the highest trainer ratings while certifying new instructors around the globe. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Lyron, who is joining us his evening from Stanford in the US. Welcome, Lyron.
Thank you so much, Shobit, for that very kind introduction. Really do appreciate it. And I would love to welcome my Aussie family this morning on the line and a few hearty Kiwis breaking lunch who are also on the line. Before we get started, I would love to and to just
Sorry, Lyron, we've just got you on mute here for a second. Yeah.
Thank you.
There we go.
Those of you, looks like it muted me again. Awesome, great. Those of you who are able to participate, please do in that. That's going to give me a little chance to know you better, know the folks who are on the line.
Thanks, Lyron. I'll just jump into, sorry, we've got to love IT. We just lost your screen, so if you could share that again.
Absolutely.
And we will definitely launch the poll now.
Awesome.
All right, folks, you should be seeing the poll on your screen at the moment. Thanks, Lyron. We have your slides back. We'll just give it a few more seconds for most of the people to vote.
All right, and as you are participating there in that poll, I'll give you a briefing about what today's agenda is going to be concerning. We're going to talk about some global major threats, but I thought it would be interesting, since I understand the majority of the participants this morning are in the Australian area, is to focus from an Australia type of case study and work our way out and find some analogies that actually apply worldwide. Then what we'll do, knowing what these top threats are in your region of the world, is to come back with some frameworks that work no matter where you are in the world. So we'll go into that next. And then the final part of our discussion will be talking about implementing a robust security architecture. So what does that involve? And in many cases, it's not reinventing the wheel. There's lots of hard work that's already gone into the development of frameworks that we can apply to help us out in our own environments. And then finally, what I hope to do is save the last 10 to 12 minutes for some interaction. So as you have questions, please go ahead and put those into the chat, and I believe they will get over to Shobit. Shobit, is that poll fairly?
Absolutely, Lyron. We've got a critical mass who have responded, so we'll be ending the poll now, and let's share those results with everybody.
Awesome. So you should see what I'm seeing. Are you moving towards already consuming cloud services? So 91% said yes on that. Has your organization experienced a known breach of services? So the majority say never. And notice that I put the word known. So there's an issue typically when it comes to breaches. The average APT, advanced persistent threat, has actually been on a system for a year or longer. Is your organization researching or implementing zero trust architecture? So here again, we almost have a split. 52% said yes, 48% said no, and that would include in this question either researching or implementing. So that's half of the participants here. So some interesting questions to ponder, and I'll set that aside, and we'll think about that as we go through the presentation and hopefully discussion. I wanted to talk about this concept to start off our conversation about this area, Westphalia. Westphalia, if you had to study in school in your history books, it's this area in the northwestern region in Germany that was a location of a treaty signing in 1648. Now, that ended the 30 Years' War, one of the most destructive conflicts in the history of Europe, when the Austrian Habsburgs tried to impose Roman Catholicism on their Protestant subjects in Bohemia. It pitted Protestant against Catholic, the Holy Roman Empire against France, the German princes and princelings against the emperor and each other, France against the Habsburgs of Spain, the Swedes, the Danes, the Poles, the Russians, the Dutch, and the Swiss. They were all dragged into it, and they all were divided inside of it. Commercial interests, rivalries, all these things played a big part, as much as religion and power politics. These wars were largely fought on the German soil, and it created this epidemic of constant starvation, cannibalism, rape, and even pillaging. scholars, when they look at the Westphalian treaty that came out of this, some of them argue about the direct impact that the Westphalian treaty had on what's called Westphalian sovereignty. We're not going to use our time with that argument. It's a known thing when referring to Westphalian sovereignty that you're usually bringing up two topics. That's what we're going to focus on. One, it's the principle of international law, that each nation state has sovereignty over its territory and domestic affairs to the exclusion of all external powers on the principle of non-interference in another country's domestic affairs. So it's that major point in our first point, the non-interference in another country's domestic affairs. Two, it is that each state, no matter how large or how small, is equal in international law. So this non-interference and this equality in international law is an interesting concept for us to consider. When we look at the non-interference of another country's domestic affairs, we actually see that there is a gradual eroding, perhaps not on battlefields, but in cyberspace. Every nation's sovereignty over its territory and domestic affairs is being challenged. Knowing that you would be the dominant audience in Australia, I thought it would be interesting to bring up some things that may seem like preaching to the choir, as they would say here in the States to you, but I think it's relevant globally. As a living case study, let's for a moment focus in on the specific part of the globe, what's happening there in Australia. And by proxy, I think that this case and the threats can apply in a broader sense to the whole world. So because of confronting a surge of cyber attacks attributed to the Chinese government, Australia moved earlier this year to bolster its defenses, promising to recruit at least 500 cyber spies and build on its ability to take the battle overseas. The investment of 1.35 billion Australian dollars, akin to 930 million in American dollars, over the next decade is the largest that Australia has ever made in cyber weapons and defenses. The Prime Minister noted that this frequency, scale, and sophistication of online attacks has also increased the steady deterioration in relationship with Australia and China. So here's where that question of Westphalian sovereignty, in my opinion, as I look at these, about these cases around the world, I wonder how rapidly cyberspace is a vehicle in eroding Westphalian sovereignty around the world. So it's something to take note of globally. Globally, this happens. I want to level set a common taxonomy for the discussion that we're going to have. And if we don't start off with a common taxonomy, that's typically the first problem in any organization, any company, any group. If you're referring to one thing from 5 different terms, your problem is going to be long before you're talking about configuring systems or creating some kind of architecture. So each of the following terms that I'm going to list, they're going to grow in magnitude and in impact as we head up towards the last term. Now, these terms are commonly used as defined by the IT infrastructure library and multiple CERT frameworks that include Carnegie Mellon. We start off with the term event. And when we say event, what we're referring to is any change in a system state. So that could actually be innocuous. An event could be innocuous. You could look inside your event log on some system, and it says that a semaphore error has occurred, and the system is still processing. An incident, on the other hand, will always be a degradation in service or a disruption that is not planned. this degradation in service or this disruption always leads to some type of investigation. Now, this investigation can also span widely, right? It could be as simple as administrator saying, you know what, I understand what happened, I'm logging what happened, there is no further thing to report on this. Or it could be as severe as encouraging law enforcement to get involved. The next one on the line of severity is a breach. So a breach will always be some proof that unauthorized access has been made of an organization's systems. And we all understand, if you're working in cybersecurity, that almost every regulation, every law has mandates related to breaches where you have to contact your constituency, your customer base, or some regulatory authority. So breaches are always going to be of a more severe rating on our line. Now, obviously, an incident, once you look into it, could actually have a breach, but a breach means that you have proof that there has been unauthorized access. Finally on the list is a disclosure. Disclosure will always mean that you have proof that the information has been viewed outside of need-to-know lists that have been created. So outside of an administrative list of people that should actually be looking at that information confidentially. This is a good thing to keep in mind as we move forward in our discussion. What we are going to focus on, though, at a minimum, are incidents. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on that actually is listed from the Australian Signals Directorate as one of the top threats, okay, in your ecosystem is this idea of a web shell malware. So malicious web shells, number one, they're going to be very difficult to detect through passive web monitoring. So the attacker is easily going to be able to send messaging to and from a system in some type of encrypted form. So if it's HTTPS traffic that's actually going to and from a system, the web shell can be written in any language targeting a web server, and then using PHP, using Perl, using Ruby, Python, Unix shell scripts in order to do their harm. So what has transpired is an interesting joint tools that was published by the Australian Signals Directorate and their counterparts in the United States National Security Agency. Now, this first time working together and publishing joint guidance is a big deal because the idea is, how do you mitigate the threat of the web shell malware? All of the links that I have, as you can see, that's a URL reference, are going to be included in a PDF that you end up getting from Shobit, so you'll be able to look this up. Last part of this is that throughout 2019, there was a range of malicious cyber actors that were actually targeting Australia's It's always going to be tied to some financial motivation. Typically, they are going to ask for some remuneration in order to let the file go. The ASD, the Australian Security Directorate, says that they recommend the following. Do not pay the ransom if affected by ransomware, because there's no guarantee paying the ransom will fix your computer, and it could make you vulnerable to further attacks. That's what's said regionally, okay? Even though the FBI generically agrees, there have been times when the FBI in the United States has actually said, you know what? There's really nothing for you to do except for pay the ransom and allow us to monitor the process that's going on. The other thing is to make sure with ransomware that you have incorporated tools before the attack. So if you were to look at the cybersecurity maturity framework, which I hope some of you are implementing, NIST has a free version of this, you would see that there are preventive, detective, and corrective measures. Think about those control categories: preventive, detective, corrective. They actually span a timeline. What happens before an incident, what happens because of an incident, and what happens after the incident, right? You need to make sure that you have those tools. So before an incident, definitely need to make sure that you have verified backups that you're doing restore testing on. Your last restore is as good as your backup is, right? So having backups that have integrity, making sure that you have basic things like antivirus tools, password passphrases that also have multi-factor authentication to get onto systems. And then corrective tools, you got to think about what will you do if you actually get circumvented, right? And one of the things that we'll say about all of these issues is it's not really a matter of if, it's really a matter of when. And if we plan based off of when an incident is going to happen, we'll have a completely different response setup. Now, that link that you see there is something else obviously going to be included in this presentation. You're going to get a chance to see a service that is a free service that is actually designed for one thing, how to get your files back. So they have basically a storehouse of basic encryption keys that attackers use with ransomware to decrypt your ransomed information, ransom data. So it's a cool link to have as far as the corrective measures go. The last threat that we're going to focus on specifically is this idea of a data spill. And this is an Aussie way of saying it, right? You might actually hear, if you were to step outside of that environment, something like a data breach, right? The idea here is that you need to actually prepare for it as an if, okay? And if you can prepare for it, as a win, and if you can prepare for it as a win, then the amount of information that's collected is obviously going to be minimized, right? And there are very strong laws there in Australia, New Zealand, data privacy laws that actually mandate a contextual collection of data, a mindful scope of data collection. So that's kind of already built in to practices that are in your environment. But it's good to be reminded of how can we minimize the amount of information and therefore minimize the impact of a breach. Some of the same tools that we talked about before are going to apply with the data spill, right? How is the information protected? Are you relying on serial hurdles in order for the bad person to be prevented at some point along the line if they are determined? Also, there's a need to actually understand the breach, right? To dig into it and to understand it. Getting into motive and understanding motive oftentimes allows us to understand what this breach is about, and then how bad is it based off of motive. If any of you have gone out and looked at the Offensive Security Certified Professional, that's a really great certification to go after if you are a technical cybersecurity professional who's tasked with technically protecting an organization. Let's pause for a moment though, and instead of zooming in to specific threats, as I know that was one of the topics of wanting to think about and to know, I want to concentrate for a moment, zooming out and looking at frameworks that exist out there to help you out, help us out, that have already been created. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel, okay? And fortunately, there has been and continues to be a tremendous amount of sweat equity being put into devising tools, processes, and frameworks to defend against a relentless enemy. Being in this business for some 30 plus years, it is amazing to me the exponential rate of the remediation that is available. And it just is, how much can we take, right? How much can we absorb? So it's really important for us to stay in line with what's being released. In order to do this appropriately, we have to make sure that we are concentrating on the difference between architecture versus design, right? You've probably seen this before. A technologist goes into a business meeting, a problem is presented, and the technologist immediately tunes out, and the technologist thinks, oh, I know what solves that problem. He goes to another business meeting, they go to another business meeting, he or she, and they say, oh yeah, I know what solves that problem. They tune out. They buy the solution, they implement it. They buy the solution, they implement it. If you have multiple technologists like that in a single organization, now you have this happening dozens of times, maybe even hundreds of times all around the organization. What does the organization look like? It looks like Frankenstein, right? And you have all these technologies just, doing things. And then you have to buy a fourth and a third and a fifth technology that interconnects all these disparate technologies that can't communicate. Have you ever seen an elderly person drive a car? And by elderly, I mean elderly. So I'm in the 50 plus club. So I don't mean someone like 50 years old. I mean somebody who's like 80, 85, 90. What would you say is the one characteristic, if you stop and think about that for a moment, the one characteristic that would describe them no matter where you go in the world? Slow. That's typically what people say. They say slow. It's a universal response when I ask that question. But why? It's not because they are feeble or lack strength. Some of them are very strong and very much in shape. My good friend, the ophthalmologist, says that we lose flexibility in our whole bodies, including our cornea lens, and cannot relax it at that age. Therefore, when they're driving, they can't relax the cornea lens, which means that they can't see far off into the distance. And the corrective things that you can put on, glasses or whatever else, is not enough. It usually degrades to that level. That is like the technologist that goes into the business meeting, especially the cybersecurity professional, and is focusing on a technology inside of a business meeting. They don't have the ability to relax their focus and to see off into the future. What they're doing is they're jumping to design. Architecture is technology agnostic. Design includes the implementation of a particular technology. And organizations often skip architecture and quickly jump to design. So before you run out to buy the latest tool that is designed to combat the latest threat, think about how often purchasing some one-off tool for a specific threat has been inadequate for doing what you desire. That's the foible of jumping directly to design. We should think architecture first, zoom out, scan the bigger picture, and the larger attack surface. So I'm going to mention these. I'm not going to dig deeply into them. I'm going to leave that to you to come back and say, yes, this is a selection of things that we can possibly use. To help with your incident management process in your organization, you could go to ISO. ISO 27035 has an information security incident management framework, okay? In this, the content is about the incident management process being described in 5 phases. And these phases are closely corresponding to the 5 phases in the first edition that they had of this. The first phase is to plan and prepare. So you establish an information security incident management policy from an incident response team. So that team works together to build up this policy, obviously with management. Then it's detection and reporting. Someone has to be able to spot and report events that might be or turn into incidents. Notice how they use the word events and then incidents, right? The assessment and decisions have to do with someone assessing the situation to determine whether it is in fact an incident. Then you have the response. If you think of steps 1 through 3, we want lots of automation there. Even artificial intelligence is helping out. But the responses will always have to include some human behavior. The AI is catching up there as well. Responses includes containment, eradication, recovery, and forensically analyzing the incident where appropriate. The fifth part, the fifth phase, has to do with lessons learned. Here, you make systemic improvements to the organization's management of information risk as a consequence of the incidents experienced. In essence, that means you don't want to repeat the failures of the past. NIST also has their own capabilities listed. And the interesting thing about NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, if you choose to use any of their frameworks, they're all free. NIST is consumed around the world. Yes, it's made in Colorado in the United States, okay? It's a group of scientists and engineers, though, who are contributing from around the world. That's why it's consumed around the world, okay? So it's not United States specific, even though NIST is something that the federal government in the United States has to follow. Take a quick look at NIST. NIST has an incident response life cycle. So the first thing that it tells you is in order to be mature, you have to be thinking cyclically about the whole process of incident response. They have a detection and analysis. Now, they group together containment, eradication, and recovery, and then they have a post-incident activity. NIST says this about post-incident. It's literally one of the most important parts of the incident, but it's one of the things that's most often omitted. The idea is to learn from what you have experienced. You can actually, if you do this well, take your post-mortem activities and turn it into pre-mortem activities. You can actually circumvent the attacker so that the attacker is never able to be successful. I want to talk about architecting a secure environment next. We separated this idea of design and architecture, right? So the idea is to take a step back, right? Take a step back from the technology and first think about what does the architecture look like. Half of you, your organizations are not investigating this or are implementing this. It's zero trust. So what I want to do just for a few minutes is to focus on the elemental components of zero trust, okay? First off, when we talk about zero trust, what we're saying is it is a discipline, and the word was coined, created by John Kindervag during his tenure as vice president as the principal analyst for Forrester Research. But the idea of it has been around for a very long time. Almost every military system in the world practices a form of zero trust. But what Kindervag helped to bring to the zeitgeist is this idea that the notion of trust is a broken model. It's an anthropomorphication of technology. It's a turning technology into human beings. Under the broken trust model, it's assumed that a user's identity is not compromised and that all user activity can be trusted. It's just not the truth, okay? If an organization is only investigating north-south traffic, that's traffic to and from the internet, if the threat gets in, like the web shell malware that we were talking about earlier, it can then move laterally, the east-west traffic in the trusted zone. So the first step of zero trust is to define what's called the protect surface. The protect surface is formed by what's called DAS. DAS has to do with the data, the applications, the assets, and the services. So it's actually looking at these in such a way that you understand a flow-based architecture of all of the elements in your organization. In talking to technologists, I always tell them, know the business, understand how to speak from a business perspective. This will force you to know the business, especially the second step, which is mapping all the transaction flows from your DAS, your data, your application, your assets, and your services. After you map all those data flows that tell you where things are going, then you can develop a zero trust network. That zero trust network is actually architected at this third step, where normally we're thinking about reference architecture at the initial step. But we want to get some information that allows us to create what is called a bespoke protect surface. So now, automatically, it's nothing gets in, nothing's turned on, no one has access, and then you turn the access on by means of your policies that you create, your zero trust policies. So this is not just about user access, it's not just about networks, it's about all of your assets. You should ask yourself the 6 questions of existence. Who should have access? What application do they have access to? When is the asserted identity trying to access it? Where is the packet destination? Why is the packet trying to get to where it's going? How is the identity being asserted? Okay? The last step is to go through this process of constant monitoring and maintenance of your zero trust architecture, your zero trust network, okay? This means that you're going to allow an inordinate amount of information to be fed into your zero trust architecture. Yes, it would mean using your SIEM systems and the amount of information that they're pulling in, and you're going to be interested in metadata, you're going to be interested in telemetry data. This is the data that may actually come up as nonsensical that you're filtering into and through reports. You want all of that data inside of a zero trust environment. Another topic that was in the poll was how many of you are consuming cloud services or moving to cloud service consumption, right? If your organization is in the process of doing it, there is another platform that can be used that's extremely helpful called the Cloud Security Alliance Trust Assurance and Risk Registry. Now, I'm just going to briefly bring up what the web page looks like if you go out there. This is a registry that was created for the express purpose of organizations that are seeking to consume cloud services can go out and can look at who the participants are that are cloud service providers that have reported on themselves. Now, they can report on themselves in a number of ways. One, they can do a self-assessment, or they can actually have a certification that is done on them. And this is at the level of a SOC certification or a SOC attestation, or a certification from ISO 27001, ISO 27017, or ISO 27018. That means it was done by a third party. This way, you can investigate who these cloud service providers are before you start consuming services from them. Now, there is use of something by these cloud service providers and their auditors of what I would say is the best use of an Excel spreadsheet I've ever seen in my life, okay? Really excited about it if you can't sense it. The Cloud Control Matrix. It is 16 domains. I have it deliberately shrunk down like this so that you can see the different domains or these colors over here on the side with 133 controls. Now, if I zoom in so that you can actually read something, you'll see that a control domain actually starts to reference the controls that you should be concerned about as a cloud consumer, right? Business continuity, change control, configurations, data security, information lifecycle. Now, where this thing really starts paying off, what frameworks are you responsible for implementing in your organization? I bet you one of the frameworks shows up here. Anybody have PCI DSS? Anybody have a SIPA, a SOC audit that they have to be responsible for, right? Anyone use anything from NIST that they use for their security? NIST security framework, their risk management framework. All of those appear up here. You actually can map specific controls in a framework back over to a specific control domain that the cloud service provider should have on, and the comments either by the audited or the self-attestation. So, cloud control matrix, you're going to map specific frameworks to regulations that you may be responsible for. There's a cool cooperation between the cloud service provider and the consumer, and you have all this in one amazing document, all 133 controls. I have the link for that for you to download it for later after this session. I want to encourage something else. So those are the frameworks. You're going to have access to those. You're going to be able to look at those long after I'm gone, long after you've forgotten about me. What I don't want you to forget about is that you have access through Pluralsight. And yes, I'm a Pluralsight author, and yes, I have full disclosure, I believe 15 courses on Pluralsight. I've done courses on the CCSP. I've done courses on the CCSK. I have courses on Zero Trust, all right? So I've done courses on their platform. But I also am somebody who consumes courses on their platforms. I don't only contribute courses. And I highly encourage that you use that as one of your ways of learning. Now, there's actually 3 types of learning. My doctoral degree from Teachers College, Columbia, and my research was actually done on critical thinking and specifically related to andragogy or adult development. And there are really 3 basic types of learning that professionals go through. So the first one, education, is really formal accreditation. You're going to get that in an institution. You're going to get that in college. On completion of some kind of program, you get conferred a degree. I personally did not go to college until I turned 40. So I actually didn't even start my first day of college. Didn't happen until I was 40 years old. Was in college for 8 years straight, my bachelor's degree into my master's degree into my doctoral degree. I was a successful professional for 20 plus years before going to college by means of training. Okay, the third thing that's listed here. Training is really about job skills specific subject matter expert learning. Okay, this is to gain competency for managing a specific task that are related to a specific practice. This training is attached to some form of examination that's going to assist in improving the efficacy of the knowledge gained. So your learning on Pluralsight is mostly constructed with the principles of training in mind. And I want you to have that in your mind, right? There's a story, allegory of a schoolmaster who was in a collegiate institution, and the schoolmaster was admonishing a student one day and took the student out on a lake and started plying the student with questions and said, how are you on your maths? And the student said, not great. And the teacher said, half, a third of your life wasted. And how are you in your reading? And the student said, not too great. 2/3 of your life wasted. And how are you in your comprehension? And the student said, well, not probably where I should be. And the teacher said, all of your life wasted. There was a big storm. The boat flipped over and the student was treading water and the teacher was having some struggles. And the student screamed out to the teacher, how's your swimming, teacher? And the teacher said, not great. And the student said, all of your life wasted, right? The training that you can get, the stackable credentials that you can get on a lot of these platforms, and I'm vouching for Pluralsight, is actually pretty powerful from the standpoint of comparisons to the learning that you might do collegiately. Now, I'm not downplaying collegiate learning. It has obviously been helpful to me, but I was able to make great gains based off of stackable credentials. So I just don't want you to forget that. And obviously, awareness is going to be something that you need to bring back into your organization concerning the threats that are upon all of us globally. So I want to pause here because I promised that I would have 10 to 12 minutes. Well, I did better than I thought, 13 minutes. And I would love to open up question and answers. So Shobit, I don't know if you can help us out with this.
No worries. Thank you very much for that, Lyron. That was extremely insightful. I especially love the subtle plugs for Pluralsight as well, so I appreciate that. Now, while we wait for some Q&As to come, some questions to come through, I want to quickly just remind you about the exit survey where you will be able to give us feedback and request further topics. If you want to learn more about Pluralsight and our solutions and how we can help your organization, you can definitely request that information, as well as a free trial of the platform through the exit survey. Conversely, you can reach out to me directly via email, which I've just posted into the chat panel. So with that, Lyron, I've got a question here. What have you seen in zero trust implementations? What specific key elements?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So the state of South Carolina was going through their zero trust implementation, and what they wanted to start with was their fulfillment system. And so the fulfillment system, one of the things that they'll tell you about zero trust practitioners is start somewhere, because things like that always look overwhelming. And so you end up getting stuck in what's called analysis paralysis, right? You're just constantly overanalyzing, say, oh, can't start it because of this, can't start it because of that, can't start it because of that. So where they started was actually in their fulfillment system. This was a system that actually does the processing from external consumers, taxpayers, into the South Carolina fulfillment system. What they did with that is they did a review of all of the transaction flows based off of employees and based off of consumers. And then once they made it out, or once they mapped out all the transaction flows, they were actually able to shut down services that were not running anymore. They were literally not being used anymore. So that was the gain that they got from all of the naysayers saying, oh, it's too big of a job, it's too big. They literally created a more productive system. So that was one space. It was literally with accounts, users. I've seen it in other spaces from a cloud implementation that I consulted on. Now, cloud, for those of you who are not doing any implementation or who are not familiar with it, every cloud provider, just name a top cloud provider, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, they are actually denied by default, okay? So that's another area that I've seen it in that is burgeoning and rapidly going, and it's actually being pushed as a way of developing zero trust. So as they're moving over pristine environments all they're doing is bringing over the behavior of zero trust into that pristine environment so that they don't counteract the pristine environment. Because everything that you do in the cloud, whether it's creating a virtual private cloud, whether it's creating any kind of access, is always going to be default deny. And then your policies that you create on your cloud platform are actually creating openings. So you just need to make sure that those openings are granular. I know I'm going beyond you're asking the question, but I wanted to tie in not just the spaces that they're doing it in, but a little bit about how they're doing it. Hope that answered your question.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Lyron. I've got another question here. In terms of speaking to upper management and getting them to buy in, what is the type of conversation you recommend to have with this management?
Yeah, I like that question. Let me give you a quick anecdote. A number of years ago, I was in a meeting. There were board members. It was a Fortune 100 company. There were board members, and the CEO was leading the meeting, and the CIO, large organization, gave a presentation. CIO walked out of the room, and the CEO said, "What the blank did he just say?" I'm not going to repeat what he said. Think about all the reasons why the CEO said that. I think they're obvious to you. The CEO was hoping to understand what would the benefits be of what was getting ready to happen, and the CIO was talking about the features. When you go to your favorite place to eat, to have a meal, and if the maitre d' invites you in, the host invites you in and says, "Oh, let me show you the refrigeration and the ovens." Unless you're a refrigeration or oven geek, okay, you actually are going to feel quite weird about that. And you're going to be wondering, why is he not talking about the food? Why is this person not talking about the price of the food? It's the same thing with the business. The business doesn't care about the features. And we begin going wrong as soon as we start talking about any technology to a business person. So we have to actually learn what the business is. It's not them that are stupid. It's actually us that's not very smart if we don't learn the business. Technology is just one more tool. The business doesn't expect the plumber to come in and talk about the details of plumbing, or the electrician to talk about a three-phase breaker, right? Why would they want that from a technologist? I would have to say that's the biggest failure that I see when trying to approach the business about a security endeavor or a technology endeavor.
Great, thank you. We've got quite a relevant question here. With the pandemic in place at the moment, and with everybody working from home, how practical is it to build zero trust architecture without impacting user accessibility when required?
Yeah, it's not only practical, it's very practical. It's actually imperative. Because what you've done now in this day and age, and it's one of the good things out of COVID. Obviously, COVID is horrific, and the mismanagement of COVID is horrific for some people in some nations. But a positive thing out of it is that it has broken the myth that people are not going to actually be productive from home. So one thing, they're working longer hours, and they haven't created a line of, they probably need to do better at creating a line of, a separation between work and home. In that, the attack surface has broadened. If you think about implementing a zero trust environment, what you're going to create are these software-defined perimeters, right? Which would be an element of a zero trust practice. These software-defined perimeters are now going to have policy management that's actually embedded in the access of these systems. So this is something that you're going to do, and if you want to do some research outside of this conversation, look up cloud brokers, okay, and take a look at Gartner's range of who the cloud brokers are, who's the leading cloud broker. And not that you take that automatically as who I'm going to go with, but that allow you to start your research on the great amount of effort and capability that's being built up right now by means of cloud brokers who help you to define your software-defined perimeters. It's even more relevant now under the pandemic, and it's something that needs to be done, and it's something that's not complex. If you have policy management by means of a cloud security broker, or you do your own policy management, it's a powerful way of controlling access to your systems. So zero trust is absolutely 100% the way to go.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I've got a fun question here. It's also quite relevant with what's happening. Can you make a high-level comment around the situation with TikTok at the moment and how organizations can learn from the whole scenario in particular?
Yeah, for me, high level, generically, it goes back to Westphalian sovereignty. That's a huge issue. And what I would say is this: I'm going to share something. See if I can pull it up rapidly, because I don't want to forget to share it later. DLPA Piper. I want to share this website with you as the final thing. It's a pretty cool website. I don't know why my last search was set to Sweden, probably because I was teaching a Swedish class. Let me bring up the chat window, and I'm not even going to bring it up in chat. Okay, to all, hopefully this goes, all panelists and attendees, hopefully everybody sees that. I want you to look that up. This is what I have to say about it, and it's going to sound a little bit probably facetious, but I think it's more pedantic. It's very specific. Fantastic. Understand the law and follow the law that you're closest to. Understand the law, follow the law that you're closest to. Also understand the regulation, follow the regulation that you're closest to. Now, what should it teach us? You have to know where a particular service, where it's being provided from. You have to understand that, because where that service is coming from is the law that's going to dictate it. Where the service is consumed is another law that's going, does that make sense? So I would say the thing that you could do high level, understand the world obviously has shrunk, okay? So that means that we have to understand what the law is if we're in an organization that follows the sun, or if we're consuming services that are outside of our region, okay? That website that I sent you is a private website. Very powerful tool to use to get you familiar with following the law, understanding the law that you're closest to. I hope that helps out.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's try to sneak another one in here. We're approaching top of the hour. In terms of preparation for major cybersecurity threats, what's your view on scaling up the awareness of people in organizations or people in countries? And what do you think of the ethics of the people? So, for example, why do some people do the right thing and some don't?
Wow, that's a heavy question for a last one.
A doozy for you.
Oh my goodness, I definitely have a lot to say on that, by the way. I don't know that we have the time, but
perhaps we can also reach out to the audience afterwards with a bit more of an elaborate answer. That's not an issue at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm willing to stay on the line. I've been up for a 36-hour period. What is a few more minutes? The idea of what you're talking about, if I go to the last part first, okay, because I think that's far more important, far more impactful. Ethics, huge, right? Two major schools of ethics, deontology and teleology. Teleology is probably one we're most familiar with. It's the one of greater good. It has the Greek root in it that talks about the thing off in the distance being up close. That's the tele, like telescope, right? So what you're saying is all the activities and actions, things that are done, how much of your activity and action is done with thinking about who's going to be helped, who's the greater amount of people that are going to be helped by those activities, right? That one we're kind of familiar with. The other one, deontology, the Greek root word there is to bind, and the things that you are bound to be, right? The things that you're bound to do. Very interesting case. You can look this up yourself. It's a bit graphic. It involves a person named Jeremy Strohmeyer and David Cash. Committed a horrible act. David Cash watched the act. No matter how many times I tell the story, and I tell people, what do you think should have happened to David Cash? He didn't commit the act. He watched it and did nothing. Well, nothing happened to him. And to this day, he's like, it wasn't my responsibility to do anything, okay? Something is broken inside of him, because when you read this case, I haven't run into a person who said the same thing that David Cash said. And I've asked literally hundreds of people, okay? But every now and then there's someone who has that thing that's broken. That thing that you're bound to do is the thing that would protect a child if a child is being harmed, either by going to the authorities or inserting yourself. That's kind of where we are right now. Is I believe that the greater part of the world has good deontology, has good teleology, despite religion, creed, color, race. That part of the world is going to have to wake up, and they're going to have to speak up, and they're going to have to behave in a way, I'm not saying violently, but they're going to have to behave in a way that they may be uncomfortable with. Basically, no longer being silent, not being silent around their dinner tables. They now need to be silent out loud. They now need to be, or excuse me, they now need to be good out loud, okay? Not good silently. And their actions have to show it. I think that's kind of where we are right now. So that's a deep topic. Those who have lived silently good need to live out loud good. I'll go back to the first part of the question that you asked about the idea of awareness. Huge. Organizationally, nationally, within your families, within your communities. Spread the word, practice it, practice awareness. Awareness is powerful. I know I didn't focus on it because I'm thinking my audience, you guys are beyond the awareness stage. You're at, the training or the education stage, but awareness for novices who are cybersecurity novices who have no understanding of it, they need to have materials developed for them that they can easily consume, okay? And it goes back to what language you use. Highly believe in that. Whoever asked that question, absolutely more power to you. But we can't be good silently. We have to be good out loud.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Lyron. That's certainly a separate can of worms. Perhaps we do another webinar for that one. So it looks like we are over the top of the hour, everyone. So that was certainly the last question. And that's all we have time for today. Thank you to Lyron for joining us for this session during his nighttime. We really do appreciate it. A quick reminder for everybody, you will receive the recording of today's webinar within the next 24 hours in the email, along with that exit survey. That's it. We look forward to having you to the next one with us. Thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.